You are sitting in a dimly lit theater, 30 minutes into a film that is undeniably, irredeemably awful. The plot is nonsensical, the dialogue is wooden, and you are actively miserable. Yet, you stay. You tell yourself that you already paid $15 for the ticket and bought a large popcorn, so walking out now would be a complete waste of money. This incredibly common, highly illogical human experience is the perfect entry point into one of the most pervasive glitches in our mental hardware. We are constantly making decisions based on what we have already spent, rather than what we actually stand to gain by moving forward. That theater scenario perfectly illustrates the sunk cost fallacy, a specific type of cognitive bias, which is a systematic error in thinking that affects the choices and judgments we make. In economics and psychology, a sunk cost is any resource, whether it is time, money, or emotional energy, that has already been spent and cannot be recovered. The fallacy occurs when we allow these unrecoverable past investments to dictate our future actions. Instead of evaluating a situation based on its current merits and future potential, our brains become entirely fixated on the past. We convince ourselves that if we just push a little harder or wait a little longer, we can somehow redeem the initial expenditure. This cognitive trap extends far beyond bad movies and overpriced popcorn, seeping into the most profound areas of our lives. Consider a professional who has spent a decade climbing the corporate ladder in a career they secretly despise, or a couple enduring a deeply unfulfilling relationship simply because they have been together for 5 years. The sheer weight of the time and energy already spent makes the prospect of leaving feel like a catastrophic failure. Explaining the emotional and cognitive trap of invested loss requires us to look at how deeply our identities become entangled with our choices. We stay not because the future looks bright, but because abandoning the past feels like admitting we made a terrible mistake. To truly understand why we can't let bad choices go, we must examine the underlying psychological engine driving this behavior, known as loss aversion. Coined by behavioral economists Amos Tversky and Daniel Kahneman, loss aversion is the psychological phenomenon where the pain of losing something is psychologically twice as powerful as the pleasure of gaining something of equal value. When we consider abandoning a failing project or relationship, our brains register the time and effort already spent as a massive, agonizing loss. We are biologically wired to avoid that psychological pain at almost any cost, even if it means we keep enduring ongoing misery. The consequences of this aversion can scale up to staggering, world-altering proportions. One of the most famous examples of this phenomenon is so prominent that it earned its own name in behavioral economics, the Concorde fallacy. In the 1960s, the British and French governments partnered to develop a supersonic commercial airliner called the Concorde. Long before the project was completed, it became glaringly obvious that the financial math simply did not work. The development costs were astronomical, and the projected revenues were dismal. Any objective analysis indicated that the most logical move was to cancel the project immediately and stop the bleeding. Yet, the political leaders and investors involved simply could not walk away. They had already poured billions of dollars and immense national pride into the sleek, futuristic jet. The thought of writing off that massive investment as a total loss was politically and emotionally unpalatable, so they kept funding it. They threw billions of additional taxpayer dollars into a doomed venture, ultimately producing an aircraft that, while an engineering marvel, was a spectacular commercial failure. The Concorde project perfectly encapsulates how the fear of wasting a past investment can force highly educated, powerful people to make shockingly irrational choices. Why is this flawed logic so deeply embedded in our species? Evolutionary psychology suggests that our ancestors lived in environments where resources like food, energy, and shelter were incredibly scarce. In a world of perpetual deficit, giving up on a pursuit, whether it was tracking an animal or building a shelter, could be a matter of life and death. Our brains evolved to be highly protective of our investments because persistence often meant survival. However, that ancient survival mechanism is now fundamentally misaligned with the complex, abstract decisions of the modern world. We are applying hunter-gatherer logic to stock portfolios and long-term relationships. Recognizing this evolutionary mismatch is the first step toward genuine self-awareness. When we feel that familiar hum of dissonance, that internal friction telling us to stay the course just because we started it, we are experiencing an ancient ghost in the machine. It is a profound realization that our immediate emotional impulses are not always reliable guides for our long-term well-being. By observing this internal tug-of-war, we can begin to separate our self-worth from our past expenditures. We start to understand that changing our minds is not a sign of weakness, but a critical adaptation to new information. We see this adaptation struggle constantly in the fast-paced world of modern startups and entrepreneurship. Founders frequently fall in love with their initial product idea, pouring years of sweat equity and venture capital into a prototype that the market ultimately rejects. The data clearly shows that consumers are not interested, yet the founders refuse to pivot. They keep tweaking the marketing or adding features, convinced that success is just one more iteration away. They are blinded by the sheer volume of effort they have already expended, unable to see that their continued dedication is actually dragging the company toward bankruptcy. This brings us to a crucial distinction, the delicate boundary between admirable persistence and the sunk cost fallacy. Society celebrates grit. We love stories of resilient visionaries who refuse to give up in the face of overwhelming odds. But true grit involves pushing through temporary setbacks in pursuit of a viable goal, whereas the fallacy involves blindly ignoring permanent structural flaws simply because you have already started. The difference lies in the evidence. Persistence is fueled by a realistic assessment of future potential, while the fallacy is fueled exclusively by a desperate attachment to the past. To break free from this attachment, we must cultivate the practice of rational decision-making. In psychological and economic terms, rational decision-making requires us to evaluate choices based solely on their future costs and future benefits. A truly rational thinker treats all past unrecoverable investments as completely irrelevant to the current choice. If you are deciding whether to finish reading a boring book, the rational question is not about the hours you already spent reading the first half. The only question that matters is whether the remaining hours of your life are better spent finishing that specific book or doing literally anything else. Adopting this mindset is incredibly liberating, though it requires significant emotional discipline. It demands that we actively practice the art of cutting our losses. When we consciously decide to walk out of that bad movie, quit the dead-end job, or close the failing business, we are not wasting our past investment. The investment was already gone the moment we spent it. Instead, we are fiercely protecting our future resources. We are reclaiming our time, our capital, and our emotional bandwidth, redirecting them toward avenues that actually offer growth, joy, and a genuine return on our energy. Unfortunately, our broader culture often actively discourages this kind of rational pivot. We use derogatory language to describe people who change course, labeling them as quitters or flakes. This societal stigma reinforces the cognitive trap, making us fear the social judgment of walking away almost as much as the internal feeling of loss. We are pressured to maintain a consistent narrative, to prove that our initial choices were correct even when the evidence screams otherwise. This collective pressure ensures that millions of people remain trapped in suboptimal situations, sacrificing their future happiness to appease the ghosts of their past decisions. But what if we completely flipped this cultural narrative? What if, instead of viewing quitting as a failure of character, we began to celebrate intelligent surrender? Imagine a society that openly praised the courage it takes to look at a massive multi-year investment and boldly say that it is no longer working. By changing how we talk about abandoned projects and changed minds, we could dramatically reduce the friction of loss aversion for everyone. We could create an environment where pivoting is seen as the ultimate demonstration of intellectual honesty and adaptability. As we navigate our own daily choices, the echoes of that ingrained bias will inevitably follow us. You will still feel the sting of a non-refundable deposit or the frustration of a half-finished, deeply flawed project, but understanding the mechanics of this phenomenon strips it of its invisible power over you. The next time you find yourself justifying a terrible situation solely because of the time you have already put into it, you can pause. You can observe the fallacy in real time, recognizing it not as a moral imperative to endure suffering, but simply as a predictable glitch in your evolutionary wiring. Ultimately, our lives are shaped not just by the commitments we make, but by the burdens we choose to put down. Every moment we spend clinging to a mistake just because we spent a long time making it is a moment stolen from our future potential. By embracing rational decision-making and learning to let go of unrecoverable costs, we unlock a profound level of freedom. We stop living as prisoners to our past expenditures and start living as architects of our future, making choices based on where we want to go rather than where we have already been.